Um, Welcome, everyone. My name is Partha Mohanram. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto and also director of the India Innovation Institute here. Thank you all for registering and attending this webinar, which is entitled Crowdsourcing a Pandemic Response, How Ordinary or rather Extraordinary Indians are Making a Difference. So I have a very interesting and distinguished panel, which includes Ashish Goel, Shankar, Krishnan, and Girish Mukher. I'll introduce all of them in a second. But let me start with a land acknowledgement. All right. Uh, Although we are meeting virtually, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Before I continue, just a quick logistical point. For Q&A at the end of each of the speakers' prepared remarks, please visit this website called slido.com, slido.com, and enter the code India in all caps. And you will be able to send out your questions. And the organizers from Rotman events will send me the list of questions. And I will pick and choose some questions which kind of cover the whole gamut of topics discussed and put them to the panel. Please post short, well-worded single questions, including your name and location. And please make sure the questions are directly related to the discussion, and try to avoid asking political questions because that is not the focus of the discussion here today. I'll try to make sure that as many questions are answered given the time constraints that we have. So let me just give you a brief sense of why this event is being held and how I, a professor of accounting in a university in Canada, how did I get involved in this area of COVID relief? So it actually started with, as many of you might also be, I'm on numerous WhatsApp groups, alumni groups with my classmates from IIM Ahmedabad and IIT Madras and other places. And we used to get, this constant barrage of random chats on different topics with occasional, requests for help. Or somebody saying that, this new COVID center has opened somewhere in Gurgaon or Delhi or something. And I just noticed that there was no way you could go back and look at this information properly. So I started within our small group of trying to organize this data in a way that people can access it, in a user-friendly manner. So it started off with a bunch of us just trying to help a few people. Initially, it was just people within our own batch, and then it gradually spread. And then I realized that we were just one of like thousands and tens of thousands, maybe even millions of ordinary Indians, and not just Indians, people from pretty much all over the world who are trying to do their very, very little bit to help in a very difficult situation. So I thought, given all the negativity which is going on, and I don't want to get into the whys, and I'm not saying it's inappropriate, but I just thought I'll share some insight from some people who are literally on the front lines of this firefighting, and how they are trying to use innovation to solve, large problems. Some problems are very micro, like trying to find an ICU bed for a 15-year-old girl in Kakinada, Andhra Pradesh, as me and some of my batchmates were trying to do yesterday, to trying to solve this systemic problem of oxygen, or even making sure that funds are raised effectively and deployed so that people can actually benefit immediately from these funds. Okay, so that's how I thought I'll hold this event and invite some people who are literally on the front lines, as it were, and have them share their experience. And at the end of it, I want the audience to not only get a sense of what is happening, and some of you might be aware of it, but also learn about how you could potentially help. How you could spare your time if that's what you have to spare, or if you have some if you wish to donate, what are some charitable agencies which are working based on the experience of these people. So before I hand over to these three extraordinary people, I thought I'll share a little bit of what I have been doing for the last 3 weeks. Okay. And this is, I'm not trying to make this out to be an exemplar. I'm sure other people are doing a far better job, but this is something that I have started been doing. For, it started off with a few minutes and then a few hours, and literally this has been all consuming the last few days. Thankfully, it's been a little less in the last few days, and it might be a sense that things might be getting better. But then again, it could also be a sign that the problem is moving to rural India, which we are not very well connected to. So let me just spend a couple of minutes trying to share with you guys some of these links. And by the way, this stuff that I'm trying to create, right, is completely in the public domain, and anybody can access it. So let me just bear with me for a second. So this started off with just me creating a small link of information about, hey, somebody said there's a hospital in Delhi and stuff, and this is meant for our internal consumption. But then I started creating this list, and what I did was, in this list, I categorized things. Like, here are some search engines, some bots which help you search for any resources. Suppose you're looking for an ICU bed, you're looking for oxygen, you're looking for a concentrator, you're looking for a drug. You can enter these bots and they'll help you. In addition, various search engines, including some of them are just Google Sheets, like this. But just whenever I get a link which works, I try to categorize it and add it to this. And I make this publicly available so anybody can access this. In addition, information about doctors, e-medicine, information about home care for people who are looking for options not to go to a hospital, real-time hospital availability links, organized by state, information about oxygen concentrators, so on and so forth, plasma, in addition to links to all other social media, testing, vaccine, etc. So I created this sheet. One more thing I realized was that very often people would be forwarding information to me in the form of images, and it was not easy to share this on a Google sheet. So I created a Google Drive. So basically, where I was able to organize. Let me just change my share for a second, okay? And I'll hand over in a second. All the information I received, I try to put them in categories, and so that if you want information about COVID care centers, whenever anybody sent me any information, and this kind of stuff is not easy to find in a chat, I just put the image onto these folders so that people can access it. So I don't want to get too much into that because this is just a resource, and I've provided the link. So people have told me that this kind of stuff is useful. It helps them, kickstart their search for resources, which is what is the most important thing. So I'm just going to stop my discussion there and just lay out what the plan for this remaining 50 minutes is. Okay, so each of the panelists will have 10 minutes. So we'll start off with Ashish Goel, move on to Shankar and Girish. I'm just going to briefly introduce these gentlemen and then hand it over to Ashish. Each of them will have 10 minutes talking about what they are working on. And then we will have 15 minutes for Q&A and then just 5 minutes for a wrap up. Okay, so the first panelist will be Ashish Goel. Ashish is the founder of Urban Ladder, which is one of India's first and most successful online furniture retailers. He is a graduate of IIM Bangalore and IIT Bombay before that. And he is actually working on a very interesting macro problem, which is trying to understand what is happening in the oxygen supply chain and trying to match supply and demand. And he's working with the government of Karnataka. He's going to talk about that. We'll then move on to Shankar Krishnan. Shankar is my classmate from IIM Ahmedabad, and he's working with me on some of these micro things we're working on, but he's also closely working with a lot of NGOs. So Shankar is going to talk a little bit about what he's doing in that space. And finally, Girish, Shankar, I must mention, is from IIM Ahmedabad, and he's a background in computer science. and he was a partner in McKinsey before he got into this nonprofit and NGO space. And the third panelist is Girish Mukher. He was my classmate from IIT Madras, a PhD from Boston University, who's a very successful tech entrepreneur who's working in a company called Heal AI Software. But he's also the CEO of the IIT Madras Foundation. And he has leveraged that foundation to generate and raise a huge amount of money in a short period of time. And he's going to talk a little bit about his fundraising. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Ashish right now, and who will tell us a little bit more about what he is doing. So Ashish, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Partha. Can you hear me well? All right, thank you. Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here and to share, a little bit about what we have been doing. As Partha said, I'm, in my regular life, I'm an entrepreneur, work in the tech and innovation and brand building space. About a month back, one of my friends called me and said, we are organizing and getting together a large number of citizen volunteer groups, and can you help in organizing things better? One thing led to another. So now we are a group of almost 35 citizen volunteer groups, and come together as a loose aggregation under a banner called COVID Relief India Alliance. One of the volunteer groups was doing a lot of good work on oxygen relief for the city of Bangalore. And as I was brought in as one of the people to help support that effort. One thing led to another. Over the last 3 weeks, we have worked on oxygen as a theme, and we have worked very closely with the government of the state of Karnataka, where they've been doing really amazing work, and we have played a small role to support them in their initiatives. Just to give everybody a little context, the COVID crisis unfortunately leads to a lot of lung issues, lung and breathing issues, and oxygen impairment in the patients. As a result, the demand for oxygen in India has gone up almost 20 times odd, 15, 20 times, let's say, compared to regular demand of oxygen. Naturally, the supply chains for such a large demand do not exist. I mean, where do you suddenly get 15, 20x of regular commodity, so to say? The good news is that production of oxygen always has been done, but it's been done for industrial use. So all over India, large part of industrial use oxygen has been moved to medicinal use, but that's not been enough. So number of initiatives. One, we worked with the Karnataka government to support them on supply chain planning, which included how do you move liquid oxygen, where do you produce it, how do you move it across the city, across the state, across the city, across the country sometimes, because sometimes the production centers may be halfway across the country. How do you move it at pace? How do you get containers, which are specialized containers? Where do you get it from? How do you optimize the usage? How do you get the refilling processes in order, etc., etc. So what we did was, as we got into this, we have put together a team of almost 20, 25 fairly high quality individuals. It's literally, consulting background, coders, product managers, etc., etc. Basically, pretty much put together a small independent organization, if you will. And we worked with the government and said, tell us whatever you need help on, we'll do it. We have no boundaries. We have a lot of skills. If you don't have the skills, you'll find somebody who has the skills. So we have streamlined this help, or we have not streamlined it. Actually, to be honest, 95% of the heavy lifting has been done by the government. They've really, hats off to them. But we have provided the additional 5% or 2%, I don't know, in streamlining the supply chain for oxygen. We have helped them set up a number of what are called PSA plants, which are basically small plants for oxygen production, which can be set up inside hospitals, inside or on top of hospitals. We have, we have helped them orient for, procurement of key raw material related to this oxygen supply chain, etc., etc. And while it's been very challenging, I think from the time we started, we were looking at a situation where a big wave was going to hit us, and we weren't sure whether how bad the situation could be. I don't know if any of you have been following the situation in some of the other cities, especially in Delhi, which peaked about 15 days before Bangalore, was extremely bad. But somehow, in Bangalore, and Karnataka, by a lot of these efforts, we've been able to withstand that. We are at the peak right now of the oxygen requirement in Bangalore. Thankfully, we are sort of not in a very bad place. The last initiative we did, which is actually spawned into a lot more things, is we built a what we call an oxygen exchange, where we did a fairly comprehensive data exercise to top down and bottom up classic work to estimate the demand of oxygen in pretty much every part of the country, in every state, so state wise, district wise, and hospital wise. And data is very challenging to get, but somehow we have put it all together, build the forward demand curves, build this whole bottom up data model for thousands of hospitals across the country, basis demand, basis number of beds they have, etc., etc. Now, and that model is being used by a lot of people who are looking to donate or support with oxygen equipment, whether oxygen concentrators, cylinders, etc., etc. Now, what has happened is by virtue of that model, and good news is that Karnataka things are a lot better now. So we have stepped away from that work a little bit, other than supporting them on the PSA deployment side. And we have actually, from our model, we started seeing some new hotspots emerging, which is the real problem today in India. And what's happening is in India right now, while the bigger centers, the peaks are starting to get behind us. The smaller centers, the tier 2, tier 3 cities, cities with populations of 300,000 and below, right, or 400,000 population and below, which is a small sized town or city in India, and all the way down to the villages. It is a really terrible situation because we don't have enough infrastructure. They have not been able to plan enough. There are not enough testing kits. It's just a long list of challenges. What I find incredible and sort of heartwarming and energizing is that both the administrative agencies, which is the government, the administrators, etc., are really doing whatever they can. I'm sure there are some bad apples, but I think fundamentally in terms of intent at the ground level, people are giving it everything they've got. And the second part is there's such an amazing outpouring of support from citizens that it's it's a challenging situation. It's just in many centers it's a carnage, frankly, but people are coming together and giving it their all. So right now we have turned our attention to support some of the states which are in real challenging hotspots, whether it's a state like Uttarakhand, which is a hilly state, or some of the states of the northeast in India, whether it's Manipur or Sikkim. So that's what we are doing now. Today actually I'm slightly positive about where we are because the aggregate curve in India has started to dip a little bit in the last couple of days. So there is hope. However, for the areas which are the hinterlands or the sometimes areas with bad geographical reach, the challenge continues to be fairly acute. The other part of the challenge, which I think, personally, that's not something we are working on, but we are seeing it all around us. The disadvantaged sections of society. I think the numbers I don't think represent the real story because there's not enough testing, there's not enough awareness, and it's just challenging. The last point I would make is for somebody like me, I've never worked in the social sector, but what we are seeing all around us, frankly, if this is literally the worst thing, and I hope we never see anything like this ever again in our lifetimes, that we have around us. So if in a moment like this, people like us, whatever we can do, some of us can give only money, some of us can give time, some expertise, some connections, whatever one can give. If we don't, as people, stand up and do something about it now, I think there won't be a I think personally for me, if I hadn't done something, whatever I can do, I think I would have questioned myself a lot harder. So yeah, that's the story. I mean, love to take any questions. I will with that pass it on to Shankar, Krishnan, and Partha has already spoken about him. Shankar also was, my hiring manager when I joined my first job at McKinsey. So with that, over to Shankar.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Partha, for having me on the panel, and thanks for everyone who's joined in. Ashish talked about one of the biggest and most obdurate structural problems facing India today, oxygen, and how he's helping to tackle that at a macro level. Partha talked about the informational challenge more at a micro level. What I'm going to do is actually share some positive experiences that I've had seen at a scale somewhere in the middle in terms of NGOs and nonprofits working on small and medium scale interventions, as well as some micro interventions that as individuals we've been able to do. When I talk about these nonprofits and NGOs, the one thing that, or the few things that are in common across all of them and that makes them inspiring examples, is firstly the passion and the commitment from the people on the ground who are leading the charge in these very difficult times. Secondly, the quickness with which they have pivoted to address perhaps what's the biggest challenge that any of us have seen in our lives in India. And thirdly, the innovation and the cleverness with which they've tried to adapt and bring about solutions which are truly unique. Let me talk about a few examples to may bring this alive. And these are those I've advised, worked with, so I have some understanding of. One such example is an organization called Swasth, which works in urban India, in Mumbai. Started out about 10, 12 years ago by a former colleague of mine from McKinsey, Sandeep. Their aim was to provide low-cost healthcare, high quality but low cost, to people, the economically weaker sections in urban India. And what they did was very successfully do that. They set up 18 clinics. They had over several 100,000 patients. They were able to offer healthcare at less than half the regular cost. They re-engineered the back end. But what I want to talk about briefly today is how they quickly pivoted when the COVID tsunami hit India last year. So they realized that the single biggest challenge that their patients was facing was the whole COVID situation. What they did was to, in the first place, make sure that they had their frontline workers through the government municipal workforce reach out to as many people as possible and disseminate some of the do's and don'ts on social distancing, protection, etc. They made sure their doctors were equipped to handle basic cases of COVID problems and triage them adequately. They also made sure that the community health workers who were out there in the field, initially they were doing it without proper PPE, without masks, etc. So getting them equipped to make sure that they were in fact shielded as well was something that Swasth did very much. And finally, even as the COVID pandemic reached, continued to grow, a lot of people found that hospitals, which typically serve them as outpatient units on other diseases, were now completely pivoted to COVID. So what Swasth did was make sure that they continue to offer an avenue, an access of good doctors for other problems people might have. So these were brave people who, I think literally every one of Sandeep and his team have themselves contracted COVID because they've been out there in the front line, working day and night at personal risk to themselves. And these are people, who have done their little bit to contribute to the COVID problem in Mumbai. If I shift gears a little bit, I want to share what's happening from urban India to rural India. And as Ashish mentioned, that's where the pandemic is really at its height right now. It's moving away from urban India. A couple of organizations that have come together in this regard are Simprints, a Cambridge-based nonprofit that I'm on the board of, and Kushi Baby, which is an organized healthcare organization on the ground in Rajasthan. And they have come together to ensure vaccine readiness and vaccine delivery. So Simprints creates biometrics, which essentially ensures that you can make sure that the patients and beneficiaries are the appropriate and the right ones. They work with Kushi Baby with contact-free biometrics, a face model, to make sure that people are reached on the ground and convinced of the need to take the vaccine. There's a lot of skepticism, a lot of worry. So disseminating the right information through people whom they trust is important. Simprints Biometrics helps Cushy Baby community workers and the government community workers talk to people, make sure that they're ready for vaccination. For the second dose, you need to make sure that the same person comes back after a given period of time. The biometrics helps in that. And finally, after the vaccination, to make sure that there are no problems later and to document these problems. So these are, a very important part of how rural India, the vaccine problem is being addressed. Similarly, there are many more NGOs that are doing yeoman service in this. Antara is doing a similar piece of work in Madhya Pradesh. The One Future Collective is an interesting model that tries to get mental help and counseling with over 200 psychologists and clinical counselors to healthline workers at the front of at the front line. I could talk about these for a long time, but I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the micro interventions that Partha talked about. Again, to showcase the kind of amazing ways in which people are rising to the occasion and contributing their little bit. One such example was when a friend of mine called from Singapore and said that her cousin was having a real difficulty. This is late at night one night, real difficulty, needed immediate plasma, somebody to immediately offer plasma O+ blood group. Thanks to the kind of the information that Partha has and other networks that one is part of, I was able to figure out that there was a former colleague who was an O+ blood group type and was willing to give plasma, and who also had COVID, so that he was eligible to give plasma. So I called up Kuldeep, as this friend's name was, at about 10:30 at night, even though it was so late for a person whom he didn't know. This is my friend's cousin. He was willing to go to the hospital immediately. He had to go twice, first to go in to document himself, make sure that the documents were right, and then go later, 3 hours later, for the plasma. But, hats off to a person like him. People like these go out of their way over and beyond to help others. And just an example of how everybody is really doing their little bit. Another example, another friend was looking for some experimental drug which is just off clinical trials. So we called up some friends who were well placed in pharma companies. Again, in the middle of the night, they reached out to initially the other pharma company and then to the CRO, managed to get these drugs from Pune to Delhi early the next morning. Amazing. Just the amount of time and commitment people have shown in this period has been outstanding. I'm well aware that, I'm just showing one side of the story here, right? Because obviously there's a lot of despair. This has been the hardest time for a lot of people on the ground. They've suffered, they've lost dear and near ones. So, and that's not likely to get better anytime soon. So there's that. And there's also stuff each of us individually, collectively as a government could have done and should have done to better prepare ourselves for this. But today is not about talking about these things. Today, what I think we are trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is point out how even in the midst of all this doom and gloom, a lot of individuals are doing and organizations are doing things above and beyond to try and solve this problem. Their little bit. It might not solve the entire problem, but whatever it is can make a difference to, someone else. I think in these dark times, we all look for the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm reminded of the Emily Dickinson poem, which she talks about, hope is a thing with feathers. And really, it's that hope that we need to all cherish and admire in the efforts that others are doing. And that's hopefully something that, will keep us going and make sure that we get through this. Thank you. With that, I want to hand it over to another distinguished member of this panel, Girish, who has done wonderful work on fundraising. Girish, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Shankar, and thank you, Ashish and Partha, for putting this together. Folks, this time it is personal for most people. Almost everyone that I know have seen somebody or the other being affected directly this time in India. So that has taken a very different outlook. for most people here. So having said that, in terms of our fundraising, it started about 2 Saturdays ago when one of our alumni, Anand Rajaraman, who's a very successful entrepreneur and a venture capitalist here, he was talking to the principal secretary in charge of COVID relief in Greater Chennai area. His name is M.A. Siddiq, who was also his classmate, and realized that the problem is very dire and Chennai is expecting a surge in the coming 2 weeks' time. That's what triggered this whole thing as far as our fundraising was concerned. Anand called me late Saturday night a couple of weeks ago, and then mentioned this is the case and we need to do something. And as Ashish and Shankar mentioned, the need for oxygen is possibly one of the number one things at that, for this moment, even though they did talk about other needs going forward, which are very important. But at this time, oxygen is very critical. So that triggered conversation with another alum who's a senior executive at a medical equipment company here, and who knows a lot of people in the industry to source. All those conversations, within about 12 hours, we realized there is a need. A number of people got together, IIT Madras Foundation, IIT Mana, and as well as the Alumni Charitable Trust, and also Canada Friends of IIT Madras on the board that Partha is part of, the similar nonprofit entity in Canada that is raising money for IIT Madras. So we realized there is a need, and we realized that what we can do is raise $1 million. So we put out a campaign, and our goal was to do this in 48 hours. And within 48 hours, way before that, we actually raised our $1 million. We had about more than 800 donors in this. That means there is a broad participation. At the same time, we also had a few anchor donors who stepped up right before or right at the outset of the fundraising campaign, which made this whole thing not only credible, but also made it easy for us to get that fundraising done. So part of this is fundraising. And the second part of this is all about procuring equipment, deploying it, and ensuring that it reaches where it's needed most, and it is done well, and then reporting back to the donors. So with Rekha's help, we were, and we continue to do this, identify the right equipment suppliers. At this point, there is a lot of confusion, as many of you may know, in terms of who has the right equipment. Is it the right stuff that is eventually going to be delivered? What is the logistics of getting it there? And also, how is it going to be deployed? And then can they report out in terms of the usage to the donors and so on? End of the day, ultimately, we are responsible to do donor stewardship, right? So with that in mind, that's the process that is still ongoing. The first batch of 500 oxygen concentrators are ordered last week, and then they are in the process of being delivered actually to this cause. Soon after we did this $1 million fundraising campaign, Indiaspora, which actually connects the diaspora of the Indian community here, which is headed by M.R. Rangaswamy. We had a conversation with him, and M.R. had just finished fundraising for Indiaspora just that previous weekend. And in fact, they raised $4.6 million. So M.R. said, hey, why don't we expand this to all of Tamil Nadu? And we ended up reaching out to some of the leaders in the Tamil community. And soon, within hours, within a day, we were able to get almost all the Tamil organizations here together, which includes TNF, FETNA, Atma, ATEA, American Tamil Academy, and so many other organizations. Every organization was ready, willing, and able to work together for the very, very first time. They had never done this before. First time. The cause was clear, the mission was clear. They also realized that the need is extremely important. So everybody worked together. Within 2 days, we put together a program. And Sunday before last, there was a 5-hour fundraising program where there was an appeal, as well as live interviews and video messages from number of celebrities and people that are well known, everybody from movie stars to sports personalities to politicians to everyone else, and entrepreneurs. They all came, stepped forward, and the first part of the fundraising, and their goal was to raise another $1 million for, and the campaign was to help Tamil Nadu breathe. So part of it was raised during that session, and then we realized we still needed some more money to finish it. So last week, and in fact yesterday, last Sunday, was the second part of the program, which again we got more than 25 video messages and interviews, and folks just step forward like anything. So this is a power of folks understanding the need. They're realizing that there is an organized way of doing this, and everything came together. So with this, I think that campaign has almost reached the goal of eventually the $2 million, 1 million from IIT Madras and 1 million for this, and it's pretty much there. And in addition, IIT Madras, more than 1 million for Chennai. We have raised far more than that, which is being deployed for Hyderabad and Telangana and other regions. And our goal is to look at it from multiple fronts. Number one, there are many organizations that, as Shankar and Ashish pointed out, that are doing work, but we want to make sure that where is it that we can make a difference? Where is it that we have local people that can actually ensure that this is deployed pretty properly? So in Chennai, we have folks. In rest of Tamil Nadu, we have right folks. And also in Telangana and Hyderabad, one of our alumni, Rahul Boja, he is the coordinator for doing this. He's an IAS officer doing this stuff. So there is enough confidence and transparency and visibility into getting it deployed there as well. So that triggered that. To summarize it, what we found is when the need is clear, when there is a well-explained aspect, and then when there is a well-articulated approach to getting it done, and then there is a 360 degrees view on deploying this and getting the report out, people step up, and not only to give money, and in fact, we have to look at it as, I look at it as 3 T's, right? It's time, talent, and treasure. So when people give money, it's treasure, and I think folks have been coming wholeheartedly and giving money. And there is also a lot of ways to multiply this. Companies match. Many companies are matching 2 to 1. Many organizations are actually stepping forward to give more. So there are ways to increase the treasure part. Number 2 is time. It's all about spending the time to make it happen, as you saw with Shankar and Ashish and Partha and others. This is being done in multiple ways here. And the number of volunteers that were involved, they step up. Almost all of them have other day jobs, but nevertheless, they still step forward. They still put in the time. Folks have been working 16, 17, 18 hours a day in order to make it happen. Incredible amount of coordination that goes on, and things happen. And then of course the talent part is when you can do things to make it happen. Organization is one, as Rekha has done in terms of sourcing and finding the right suppliers and ensuring that it's the right product. So and then others who are actually in the business of distribution and logistics and all that stuff. Tremendous effort that goes in. So as I say, it takes a village. In this case, it has actually taken a global approach to this. It is a lot of ordinary people, but doing extraordinary stuff in order to make it happen. And what folks also realize is we're not done, right? Vaccinations need to be done for everyone in India. And then if there is God forbid, a third wave that may pop up in parts of the country. Now we have established a playbook. We have established a channel. We have established a set of people that we can work with. And then we have established the understanding of the need and how things need to be done and how it can be done. And it's end of the day, it's a partnership between the government, NGOs, the different organizations that are involved in this, and of course the people that are stepping forward to do this. I tell you, it's very gratifying, and keeping fingers crossed to get past this pandemic, and then we can make this world safer, make this world much more everyone together, and we can make it better. Over to you, Partha.
All right. Thank you, Girish, Shankar, and Ashish for very insightful comments. Um, we've received a lot of interesting questions, and I've sort of decided I've picked on 3, 4 of them for us to discuss. But I just want to mention a couple of things. It's not just extraordinary Indians who are stepping up to the plate. Uh, there have been offers of help from people from every background. So personally, for me here at the University of Toronto at Rotman, I've had Israeli colleagues of mine in operations management, Offer Baron and Dimitri Kras, offering to help, with helping with, they have tremendous experience in operations management, and they set up this COVID PPE exchange, which was very successful in Canada's fight last year, beginning of the pandemic. My colleague from China, Hai Lu, who also heads a very prestigious Canada-China research center here with Peking University, has offered to provide contacts with top level contacts with oxygen concentrator manufacturers in China. So obviously in these kinds of things like sourcing, having a personal contact makes a difference. So it's very, very gratifying to see that the world sees this as as a really, really important thing, and everybody's stepping up. So I just want to mention that. So I've received a few questions, and I'm just going to pick a few which I think are broad in sort of their outlook, so each of you can answer it. And the first question, and if I get the person's name wrong, please bear with me. I think it's from Sunny. He says, how do you ensure, and some of you have already addressed some of these points in your comments, but I'll ask the question nonetheless, right? What can you do to ensure that there's transparency and traceability in charitable donations that people make? Like, so this is I guess, Girish, maybe you want to go first, and then I want to hear from Ashish and Shankar as well.
Sure, Partha. I think it's a great question. And in fact, that is the number one thing on most donors' mind. And when we raise money, we are responsible for it, number one, and then giving this entire donor stewardship, which means how the money is used, how the money is spent, and then realizing that the impact has been recognized to the fullest extent is the key part. In order to do that, if we have visibility into how this is deployed, and if there is a very clear criteria on how things are going to be given and how they are going to be deployed. So when you give, let's say, 100 oxygen concentrators, where does it go to? What is the criteria for this to be done? And then once they go there, how is it being put to use? So in terms of this, having the right people that we have visibility into, who we feel responsible. In our case, M.A. Siddiq in Greater Chennai Corporation, as well as Rahul Boja in Telangana and Hyderabad. We know that they will stand up for it, and they have guaranteed that they will ensure they give full visibility. So that helps us from that point. Number two, getting pictures, tracing it, and ensuring that they're being put to use, and having that end-to-end visibility helps us a lot in doing it. And then just want to add also that most organizations have waived any of their overheads and fees and anything that relate to this. In fact, TNF, they're even taking and funding the credit card fees, which are about 2.5% on average. They said they would actually sponsor that when they raise $1 million here, right? So which amounts to a few tens of thousands of dollars. So folks have gone out of the way to make this happen. At the same time, in terms of transparency, it's all about knowing what is the value chain, who's in the process of that, and they are accountable for it. And then eventually getting that and ensuring. So that's why when I said our job is not done until it is all finished and everybody is happy and the world is safer.
Shankar and Ashish, if you want to add anything.
Looking at it from the other point of view, I think one of the good things I've seen, and this is actually pre-COVID as well, is a number of organizations that have actually geared themselves to be transparent and visible on the NGO and non-profit front. Because I think increasingly these are run professionally, these are run by people who have the very best of intentions, and not only that, also know how to organize themselves professionally and well. So for example, one of the organizations I work with and also fund, Swast, last year when we actually as a class funded them, they used to give us weekly reports of how the money was used, gave us weekly accounting for what was directly spent, which is the bulk of the money, plus small overheads in logistics and transportation, etc. And that kind of visibility into where the money is deployed is something you can expect from a whole bunch of organizations. There are also meta NGOs and meta organizations like Give India, which do a rating and a transparency index of NGOs. So you can look at that to see, is this an NGO or a nonprofit that you want to fund, and which will be steward your money well, because not only do they have the right intentions, they should also use it efficiently for maximum impact. So I think the good news is there are a lot of good organizations out there. And if you do a little bit of searching, it shouldn't be that difficult to get that visibility and transparency.
Ashish?
Yeah, I mean, I slightly different thought on this, and I'm in general, a big believer in putting in place governance process before you do anything. What I've seen in all my interactions, and is a very common thought process that the government system can sometimes be, inappropriate in their behavior in some ways. What I'm seeing on the ground right now is the challenges and the problem in front of everybody is so acute that more often than not, those tendencies of commission or omission, actually people are really forgetting. I mean, I'm taking a slightly idealistic view, but I think really I'm seeing people rising above those natural tendencies of commission and omission and just focusing on saving lives, irrespective of who they are.
That's
So at
good.
this
That's
point,
great
frankly,
to
I
hear.
would err for pace versus perfection of traceability and so on.
Right. See, this is related to another question that somebody had asked, and I'm just going to read the question. We don't necessarily have to answer it, which is that the needs in India are very regionalized, right? So and it's keeping on shifting. Like we know that, for example, Goa is going through a very tough time. Rural India is going through a very tough time. So my view on this is, if you're looking to donate money, right, try to donate to organizations which are going to deploy them effectively. So for example, if you want to donate to Tamil Nadu, right, I'm not saying this because I'm an alumnus of IIT Madras, but the IIT Madras has a setup in place. So for those of you who go to have alumni of other institutions, right, your institution probably has an alumni group just like ours, which is also working in a different regional part of India. So that's what you should seek out, because that way the money reaches these institutions almost immediately, and a deployment plan is already in place. I think so. Let me just move on to the next question, which I think is all of us can answer, which is how can I help? And I'm very glad people are asking this. How can I help, given the work that people like you are doing? So I'm going to give my answer first, and I'll throw it out to you, right? So I think I'm borrowing Girish's 3 T's, right? It's basically money, time, and volunteering. So the money we just discussed, how you can do. As far as my effort is concerned, if you find any COVID resource, please email me. I'm going to share my email address at the end of this thing. I will use it to update my list. Please share my list freely. It's open for anybody to use, so that some person, if they can get some resource to find something, I will feel that all my work is actually worthwhile, right? And there are places where you can volunteer, and there's for example an organization which is trying to get doctors to volunteer, and not just doctors, they need non-doctors also to volunteer. I'll have a list of that in a few minutes time. But what about you guys? What do you think? How can people help?
Yeah, I can give one example as well. So last week, when this program we were doing with all the Tamil organizations, with IIT Madras alumni organization and Indiaspora, one of my friends reached out. His name is Sundar Nathan, and said, "Hey, I would like to help." Right. So as soon as he came on board, Sundar was able to reach out to a lot of people and get video messages from everybody, from Vishwanathan Anand, who is the chess grandmaster, all the way to about half a dozen to a dozen sports personalities and actors. Immediately, within days, he was able to do that, right? So even he didn't know that he actually had this reach. But the instant he knew what was the purpose, what is needed, he just could make it happen. So what I suggest is each and every one, and when you talk about, we're all ordinary folks. If we are interested in doing something, there is so much we can all do, each and every one of us. And it's all about that intent. The instant you do that, you don't realize how much talent you all have and how much you can contribute to this. It is just amazing. So please get involved in all 3 fashions. Yes, money is needed. We're all in the process of raising money, but that's only a part of it. And the other parts, you can actually make a equally or a much larger contribution as well.
Yeah, let me echo that actually. Money, Partha is going to share at the end of this a bunch of non-profits and NGOs you can donate. There are literally hundreds more. And you can go to Give India, look at that. You can call any of us. We can share more depending on what your passion is. Number two, if you want to volunteer, I think Partha referred to this one. Project StepOne is a good one, right? Where you don't need too much expertise. They take phone calls to patients to triage them, keep them out of hospitals. If you have a mild case of COVID, if you have anxiety of you may or may not have it, you don't need to either waste your time or the doctor's time by going to precious, critical care units. You can call these either doctors, paramedics, or frankly simple volunteers who handle a lot of your queries, handle the FAQs, pass you on to the right people. Similarly, I've put in people, friends and people with talent or otherwise into many of these organizations that are looking for volunteers at this critical time. And finally, just doing what you can individually in your groups of friends, family, communities, alumni associations, whatever. Again, a lot you can do, right? You have each of us as networks that we sometimes don't even realize we have. So for example, when I was looking at some of my networks in Tamil Nadu and Kerala in particular, which I come from, call friends, be persistent, call friends of friends. You will sooner or later realize the 6 degrees of separation is not really 6 degrees. It's probably 2 degrees. So if you need somebody of some particular expertise, a pulmonologist, you can find them and pass them on to somebody who needs it. Similarly, if you're looking for an oxygen concentrator, call 5 oxygen concentrator vendors, find out which of them are genuine, which seem legit, do some back check, and then give it to your friends. So there's a lot you can do on money, on volunteering, on individual interventions. And this is the time for all of us to come to the party, as it were.
Ashish?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with the points made. I would just say money is the easiest thing to give for people like us. You should just do it. For giving your time and volunteering, jump in, be willing to learn, be agile, keep trying, do something, and you will automatically find something that you will find your spot. All the help in the world is not enough at this point, honestly.
Right. And just one thing, I'm going to share a list, but somebody asked a question about what are some Canadian organizations doing specific fundraising. I know for a fact that many of the diasporic organizations in Canada, like the Canada India Foundation, has a fundraiser going. I'm sure the other Indo-Canadian organizations, Indo-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, has fundraisers going, and so on and so forth. I have links to one of them in the presentation I'm going to share. So certainly you can do that. Now, there's a bunch of other questions, and we can't answer all of them. I'll maybe ask just one broad question, which is, we're doing all this, but what can we do to change? And this is probably a very difficult question. We can't answer it in the 3 minutes that we have. But what can we do potentially to help change personal behavior such that next time around, we guys don't need to do all of this? Is there anything we can do in our efforts to ensure that people are, because I mean, and again, I don't want to get into this thing of who is to blame for this, but this is more in terms of preparing for the next third wave. Can we make sure that steps are taken by ordinary individuals that the next third wave either doesn't happen or happens with far less severity? And again, just a 30-second view from each of you, if you think you have any comments on that.
So I've got a couple of comments on that part. I think firstly, there's a whole bunch of learnings that cities, communities, and people like us have gone through, right? I think it's incumbent on us to share that, get it out to a wider audience, as well as people, including us, to reflect on that and make sure that if and when the next wave hits, whether it's in India or outside, how can we be better equipped to handle that? The second, I think, is a more positive note. I think it's amazing how young people in particular, but everybody has pitched in and started to help. And if we can sort of build on that attitude that, look, our job is not here to sit and criticize or look for someone else to solve it. But, it's a question of out there, what can I do to make things better? What's a little I can do to contribute? And that attitude I see very much. And that's one of those reasons why this is the worst of times, also the best of times. So I think if we can build on that and in some sense remember that, I think it'll serve the purpose.
I can share my thoughts on that. much agree with what Shankar said. Two more points I would add. One, I think, what is it about individual behavior that has caused this pandemic? I think that requires deeper introspection. I don't think we have the answers to that yet, in my view. But the second point I would make is, I genuinely believe that really a catastrophe like this will spur a better humanity among all of us. It'll just make us all better humans. And we are seeing that all around. I think everybody is asking these questions. I'm sure around the world, certainly in India. Everybody is asking these questions about, what do we need to do differently? How can we be better human beings? So, maybe it's in such a bad time, it's not a good thing to say, but I just hope that that does spur us to become better human beings in some ways.
And Girish?
Yeah, just want to add. So we saw that this year, influenza flu was almost non-existent, right? Because people change their behavior to be more careful and all that kind of stuff. So I think there is a trend. So that folks are already, at least a majority of people or large number of people have already started taking a little bit more precaution in terms of hygiene and all that kind of stuff. That helps a lot. I think the key part is awareness and also the right information. So awareness, I think, is catching up quite a bit. Then it's a question of, how do you change your behavior once you're aware and once you get the right information? I know there is a lot of misinformation, for example, regarding vaccination that goes on. As assuming all that changes and people are able to recognize the right stuff, it is very likely, and I think what we have experienced collectively across the world, very likely that our behavior will change as a society and as individuals. But having said that, human beings are social animals. We want to be with people. So we will be with people. The question is, can we take enough precautions and enough stuff and all that? And I feel, it's getting more and more inbuilt into people and especially kids. So children now are, growing up with this as sort of the baseline. So hopefully this will help everyone to understand, internalize, and then over time, do a much better job.
Thanks, Girish. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go over a list which I've created. And this is not a complete list. Shankar mentioned this. This is just a subset of some amazing charities doing work. So the first page has international charities. So people in the US and Canada can probably donate. The first one is this coalition from Canada of 12 large aid agencies. The second is the IITM fundraiser that Girish is running, and Help India Breathe, the local fundraiser that the Canada India Foundation is running. The Desai Foundation is an amazing NGO based out of the US, which is doing work in India, which also tries to work with women and children. Seva International is doing a lot for oxygen concentrators. Their fundraisers going on in USA and Canada. Wish Foundation is something, again, and TN Foundation are two agencies that Girish is working with and has very good experience. Now, if for those of you in India, here are some of the charitable agencies that Shankar and others have mentioned. Antara, Teach for India, Swasth. The Hemkund Foundation is doing unbelievable work, especially Hemkund and many of the Sikh diaspora organizations are doing unbelievable work. Safe in India. And lastly, I just found this list online. And this has some of these, but it has a list of verified charitable agencies. And this information is also available on the YouTube link for those of you who are interested. Finally, Project StepOne, right? You don't have to be a medical professional, but they're looking for volunteers, volunteer doctors, volunteer nurses, just people who are like volunteer counselors, just people to man phone lines and stuff. So there's lots of opportunities to volunteer. And these are the other two organizations, Kushi Baby and Simprints, that Shankar had mentioned. So I think we're basically running pretty much at on time right now. And I would like to end with a couple of, with an anecdote and firstly, a simple saying, right? The first question which comes up when we face this insurmountable problem is, what can we do? Just reorganize those words. Do what we can. Whatever it is, even if it's a little bit, do what you can. I think that's the first thing true. Second thing, I want to end with an anecdote. This is a story about this child who was, old man was going for a walk on a beach, and he noticed a child was tossing something into the sea. And he asked his child, "What are you doing?" Child said, no, there was a storm last night and all these starfish have washed over onto the sea. and the sun is going to rise, and they can't find their way back fast enough. And if I don't toss them, they're going to die. They're going to bake in the sun. The old man says, there are 10,000 starfish here. Is what you're going to do going to make a difference? The child tossed one more starfish and said, it made a difference for that one. Okay, so we cannot save everybody. Plus, please try to find some starfish to save. Okay, and I'd like to end with that. I want to thank Ashish, Shankar, and Girish for their unbelievable work and for their time on this panel. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the folks at Rotman Events, Megan and Daniel, for always doing a fabulous job that you guys always do. And I hope you all have a safe the rest of the day, and hope this event was useful and it inspired you to do your bit to help India in its time of crisis. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Partha. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.